Hello, YouTube yogis, and happy holidays. This is a practice that's going to be a two-part series. It's going to be happy holiday hips and hamstrings. So, we're going to start today with the hips, a lovely practice for you that you will need a block and a strap and some lab approved balls for a little bit of myofascial rolling at the end. And you can see I have a selection here because we never know what's going to feel good. So let's get started right away. Coming down onto our back and invite ourselves into our hips, or what I like to call the pelvis, the lovely pelvic girdle. And just place your hands anywhere in that area. Feel it. Feel the front of your hip bones. Follow out to the sides. As you're doing so, your knees can be bent. Let the feet be heavy on the ground. The back and spine lands. So you're fully supported. And as you feel the support of the ground, just explore with your mind and your hands the area that you would consider your pelvis, your hips. Remember the back and the sides, even the bottom. Think of it as a bowl. Land and locate in that bowl. We'll just do some simple movements to see where we are today. So lifting your feet up off the ground, make some small circles with the knees. Think of moving from your hips and just see how that feels for you. The rest of your body stays relaxed. Some very simple circles. If you feel more like doing a side to side pattern, you can do that. But notice how your hips respond, almost like you're massaging the back of your hips into the ground. And then place your feet back on the ground again, about hip distance apart, knees bent. And take just your left leg. We'll start with your left leg. Take a nice breath in. As you take a breath in, think of pushing your left shin bone and hip forward. So I call this one walking in place. Just give it a little push and feel the arch on your left hip. As you breathe out, release that. We'll work with just the left side first. Breathe in. If you don't want to do it to your breath, just do the movement. Otherwise, think of the inhalation as the effort and the exhalation surrender. There's different ways to make the same movement. You can really think of stretching the left hip long, then you'll probably feel less arch if you just lengthen it, or you can push into your foot. As I said, you can push your shin forward. Just noticing the way that your left hip is lengthening and your right hip might even be shortening. Take a few more of those. And then rest for a moment. Feel your left foot and widen it just a little bit out to the edge. So your heel is on your outer hip. Sense the big toe and little toe side of your left hip. Starting from the little toe side. As you breathe in, fall onto the little toe side. So we're going into external rotation of the hip. Let it fall out. Breathe in and come back to that flat foot, that neutral position. Feel your big toe side, and as you breathe in, come onto the big toe side and gently push that thigh bone forward and inward. Breathe out, come back to that flat foot. So we'll do the movement on the inhale, dropping out to one side. Exhale back to center, your space of grace. And then to the inside. So just going through that internal and external rotation. And the right knee is staying upward. Sometimes if you find your right knee's trying to get in on the movement because your whole pelvis wants to rock, instead of that, you could take your right leg long. See how that feels? Do the same movement. Might feel a little more locked in there. What we're trying not to do is let the whole pelvis rock. We really want to work from just this left side. So whichever way you want to try. Right leg long or short and bent. Stay present now in that left hip. And coming back to the center on exhale, do one or two more. And then we're going to focus on just that inner movement. So feel the big toe side, maybe even widen your feet a little bit more. And now as you breathe in, really push into the arch side of your foot and draw the knee and the hip forward. So feel your left hip lift and the weight will shift into your right hip. If you want to add an arm movement to this, you can reach your left arm overhead. So you're lengthening through that whole left outer hip and through your side body. Breathe out. just release that. So we'll just go that way. Breathe in and lengthen. You can press into the big toe side of your foot. Think of your long, strong femur bone reaching towards the right front corner of your mat. I tend to turn my head too towards the left arm. See what happens if your head wants to roll. And the option to make this movement from different places. So what does it feel like to initiate the movement from the hip, maybe even lifting the left hip away from the ground to create that force versus pushing the thigh bone forward or even the kneecap forward? We're moving from your foot, tipping on to that big toe side. Any combination that feels comfortable and takes you into your end range of motion. Let's take this next one and just hold for a few breaths. Visualize your left hip as the center of your left side, the leg below, torso, arm above. Just send some good juju into your left hip. Last breath out. And then come back up. Walk your feet back in so they're equal with your hips. And then we're going to take the left ankle, cross it on the right thigh. Just take a moment there first just to feel that. You might even gently press the left leg away. Sometimes what happens is the left hip gets caught up by your armpit. So we're going to push it down and make the hips the same height. Just starting from there. And we're going to give the left leg a little ride. So you're going to lift the right foot off the ground and make some small circles with the right knee, like we did in the beginning, but just one leg, circling the right knee. Get that nice stretch in the back of the left hip. Feel your left butt cheek lifting off the ground, perhaps. If it feels like you want more of the side-to-side motion, you can do that too. Easy stretch for the left leg, and the right leg is working a little bit. You can continue on with this leg position, or the other one I like to take is if you drop the right foot back down, cross the left leg completely across the right, so the back of the left thigh is resting on the right thigh, the top of it, and do that same thing. And now you might even squeeze your thighs together just to create a little more force, pressing the back of the left into the front of the right. Notice how your core supports you as you do this one too. And if it's not supporting what you'll see is your low back will arch and your abdominal area will pop up. So keep that low back on the ground, tailbone slightly lifted. So feel the connection of the top rim of the front of your pelvis to this core area. Going nice and slow, just exploring. So a little mobility, a little stability from your abdominal area. And then we'll come back down, uncross the legs. Take both legs out just for a moment. And just let them hang. Be still. And sense yourself from the left toes to the hip again. And from the hip up through the shoulder, the arm. Just notice any differences between the left and the right. And I'll be spinning around. You can stay where you are. But we'll switch and do the right leg. So starting with both knees bent, feet on the ground. Let the back of the pelvis sink into the ground. Your spine's completely supported, the head. Feeling just your right leg now and your right hip. Feel that connection point. And as you breathe in, push the right shin forward. So this first one, my hips in the center of my knees and my big toes are about in alignment. So my feet are only as wide as my hips. I'm just gently pushing forward on the breath in and the release on the breath out. Notice how there's a lengthening through the right waist, maybe a little bit of arching. All depends on how you're making the movement. So if I push into the foot or push my kneecap or my shin forward, I'll feel more arching. Can you sense that? Versus thinking of sliding your right waist forward. So there's the option of more of a slide or a little bit of a lift in an arch. Play with both of those. Notice the left side shortening as the right side lengthens. Just feeling this little tilt in the pelvis. One or two more there. And then pausing. Widen the right foot so that the heel is just to the outside of the hip. So we don't want the inner knees to crash together. And center your foot, the big toe side and little toe side, all the way up through the hip. And when you're ready, breathe in and drop onto the pinky toe side. Let that inner right thigh open up. Left knee stays up towards the sky. Breathe out and come back to center, foot flat on the ground. Breathing in, coming onto the big toe side. So there's your internal rotation. Breathing out, coming back. Very simple, but see if you can sense when your inner thigh is stretching and your outer thigh is engaging or shortening. And just the opposite, when does your inner thigh engage and your outer hip stretch? Just learning those sensations of what it feels like to have our muscles long and what it feels like to have them short. Option is there to move from the foot. Think of your ankle even rotating, what we call inversion, coming inward, and eversion going out. That's one way to move. You could move from your knee or your shin. You can move from your femur bone. Or you could think of moving from the hip itself. Feel those outer hip muscles, inner thigh. And if you find the left leg is moving too, there was that option to just lengthen the left leg. Get a different stretch here anyhow. Opening up the top of the left thigh, the front of the hip, right, our hip flexors. And then back to the center. So now we'll work on just that internal rotation. So widen your foot just slightly, or maybe it's already where it needs to be, but make sure it's outside of the hip. Now really push, make more of an effort to lengthen, not just through the hip, but the waist, and you can reach your right arm overhead. And breathe out, let it go. Breathe in, imagine that your thigh bone and your arm are reaching away from one another. So the hip is getting that long stretch as well as the side and the ribs. And come back. If you find your head wants to turn in one direction, you can do that. Make sure your head is fully supported. And oftentimes it feels like it's an arm and a leg movement. It could be. You can be initiating from your thigh or your arm. But sense the change in your hip, in your side body, the top of the waist. Feel free to continue moving through a few or stop and hold. It's nice too to notice sometimes that with the internal rotation, one side might be more comfortable or tighter or looser than the other. Let's stay with it, breathe into it. Let go. Inner knee is heavy. Feel the support of the big toe side of the foot. One more breath. And then release that, and we'll explore the external rotation a little bit more. So walk your feet back in so they're just as wide as the hips. Cross the right ankle on the left thigh. And start by just you could take your hand, your thumb and your index finger, and lengthening that right hip. Sometimes it gets crunched up there, right? So push it away so it feels like your pelvis is even across the front of the abdomen. And then maybe just gently push your thigh bone away and release that. See how that feels before we lift up the left leg. Just familiarizing yourself with where you might feel the stretch. Feel that sensation. And then this time it'll be the left leg giving the right leg a ride. You can lift the left foot off the ground and take it in some circles. Just go side to side. Check in that the rest of your body's staying relaxed, the head, the shoulders, the neck. A nice slow pace. So the slower you go, you're going to connect with those core muscles. You're going to feel that support from the front of the abdomen. We can keep the leg in this position. This might be a very yummy, luscious way for you to go, or set the foot down for a moment. Take the back of the right thigh, the hamstrings that we'll hit next week, to the front of the left thigh and make those same circles. Just a sense of freedom of movement. Back and forth. And we'll take that one down. Let it relax. Take both legs out long. Shake them out. Maybe even bend your knees a little bit, like you're dribbling them like basketballs. Jelly roll your legs. And then come into a still point for 5 breaths. Come back into the space of your pelvis. Is there a sense of warmth or coolness? Does it feel heavier or lighter, or just more awareness of the space all the way around 360 degrees of your pelvis? You could even place your hands on your abdomen. Soft belly breath. Feel your abdomen rise on your inhale, like you're filling your pelvic bowl. And let it land. Release on the exhale. So that first part of Happy Holiday Hips was about really just finding a freedom of movement and placing ourselves in our hips. Now we're going to do something more for stability. So we'll start by bringing the strap in, and you do want a strap that closes. And if you don't have a strap, you can always use a belt or a robe, something like, a robe belt works. But we do want to be able to tie it. So we're going to take it and put it around the thighs. And you want to be in what we call constructive rest. So you're, again, the center of your hip points, what we call your ASIS points, should draw a line right through the center of your knees. And then set the strap at that width. And your strap is right in the meaty, so we don't want to be all the way on the knee joint. We want to be just above the knee joint. I'm upside down, right? But on the meaty part of the hamstrings. And set that strap up. Feet back to the ground. Relax the low back. And then you're going to push just a little bit into the strap and release. So imagine trying to stretch the strap and release. This should feel really good in the back of your hips. Notice what you feel there. Just a little pushing in and a release. Do that a few times, see how it feels. And then we're going to do this in a bit of a bridge movement. So you're going to push in to the strap and then lift up just a little bit on an inhale, and then release back down, release the pressure. So push in first, press your legs into the strap, a little bit of a lift, and then complete release, coming down, release your pelvis down, release the pressure of the legs into the strap. See how that's feeling for you, particularly in the back around the sacred sacrum. So you can picture the back of your hips coming into the sacral area. And just lifting as high as it feels good for you today. Full release. Sometimes on the release, even my knees want to fall together and then I have to fix the strap. So you can continue to do these in movement, or if you'd like, press into the strap, lift yourself up, and just take a few breaths in this bridge pose. Wherever you may be, continuing to press into the strap. Might feel the muscles in your buttocks. So this is the back of the pelvis, right? Your glutes firing. And continuing to press in. Feel like the movement better, you're there. Want to feel a little more hamstrings, getting ready for next week. Imagine dragging your heels towards your hips. Isometrically draw your heels towards your shoulder blades. Reach your kneecaps forward towards the front of your mat. A little bit of strengthening here. Stabilizing. for the back side of your pelvis. And also the outsides as you're pushing into the strap. One more breath. Come down, completely release. Let your knees fall together just for a moment. You could even widen your heels apart. And then we are going to do one more thing with the strap on, so keep it on there. Put that pressure back in and then just rock the legs, both legs now, from side to side as far as you want to go. Big toe, little toe side. But keeping that bit of pressure on the strap as you go side to side, very slow. I still tend to do the inhale to one side, the exhale back to that space of grace and relax. Let's see what works for you. If you want to reach the arm overhead opposite the direction that the knees are pointing, you can do that. By keeping that little bit of pressure on the strap. And back to the center. You can remove the strap. Take it off. Take your legs out long, shake them out again, and just recenter yourself in the center of your universe and your pelvis. Let the leg bones be heavy, the back and spine, the shoulders, the base of the skull. Maybe a little more belly breath. So breathe to the belly. Imagine all that life force energy filling your pelvis on the breath in. Expansive quality. Releasing, relaxing, purifying on the breath out. It's beautiful space in our body. Next one, we'll take the knees back into that bent position. And we're going to take our block. And the block will go right between the knees at about the same space where the strap was. You're going to take an exhalation now and squeeze the block. And what we're trying to do is you might feel a contraction in the abdomen. And if you're not feeling that, to help that along, you can gently press the low back and low ribs into the ground. So think of the front of the pelvis contracting. But the other thing we can look for is pelvic floor. So this time the force will be on the exhalation because that's going to help us to find this transversus abdominis and pelvic floor. Squeeze the block and imagine drawing the pelvic floor up and in. So the bottom of your hips, right? Where the pelvic bowl. Squeeze the block and press into the low back just a little bit. See how that feels? So oftentimes the sacrum really likes this one because what you're actually doing in this one, as opposed to pressing into the strap, is you're creating space in that sacral joint. Do a few more of those and then we'll do the lifting again. So now as you exhale, squeeze the block. You can draw in through your abdominal wall. So think of cinching the area between the two hips from the pubic bone to the navel center. And then lift up just a little bit into that bridge. Breathe in and release all that. Breathe out, squeeze, lift. So just a slightly more active exhalation. Breathe in. You can even let your belly stretch. Let the back arch. Breathe out, squeeze. Feel those adductors in your inner thighs. That's part of this. And if we can get the adductors, that helps to feel the bottom of the pelvic bowl engage and the front of the abdomen. So the front and the bottom of the pelvis. Remember, this is the stabilizing part. Stay present. Release on the inhale. Continue to take a few more of these in movement or squeeze and lift up and hold for a few breaths. So with this one, because we're focusing more on holding ourselves from the transverse abdominis or the front of the abdomen and the pelvic floor, what you can sometimes do is squeeze the block and think of trying to release the backside of your pelvis. So the glutes, let the glutes just hang in gravity. Can you let those release more? Really think of using the inner thighs, the abdominal region. Your legs will be active, stretching the front of the hips. But if you feel that big old clench in your buttocks, try to release it a little bit. And let that come down completely. Take the block out. Just as we did in the very beginning. Lift your knees up and make some circles again. We did it with bent knees. If you feel like you want to extend the legs, you're welcome to do that too. Keeping the low back on the ground, just circling a little bit. All right, so we're going to move into a little bit of a myofascial release, and I'm going to turn the other way. We'll start with the left leg first. And my lab approved ball selection is right here. So I'm going to use, this is a soft pink ball. You can use a tennis ball, but my rule with any myofascial is that the myofascial tissue is basically the skin of your brain. It's the skin of the nervous system. So it doesn't want to have a party that's so sensational that you're gritting your teeth, right? In fact, we're going to do more of a still practice. So to that end, you may want to keep your block handy too. So coming back down, start with bent knees and take whatever size ball you've chosen. We're going to explore the back of the pelvis. So slip it right underneath your buttocks. And instead of moving right away on it, see if you can just let the weight of the hips sink in. If you find it uncomfortable because you're tilting too far to the right, you can take that second block, I'll turn towards you, and put the block, or I'm sorry, the first block, put the block underneath your right hip. So sometimes what that'll actually do too is it'll bring more weight into the left side. You can see my right hip is actually higher now. So, oh boy, yeah, big difference. So now I'm really weighting myself into that left hip. But that's just an option to play with. Being still first. So if you have a really sensitive area, as I do, mine happens to be right next to my sacrum, I don't go right into the area, I go sort of next to it. So what we call the trigger point sometimes. And starting with your knees bent, instead of thinking of moving from your pelvis, just move your leg a few times first. Maybe bend the knee and straighten the leg. And then remember the movement we did earlier. We were dropping onto the big toe side of the foot and the little toe side. You can do that in and out. So the pelvis is staying still and supported, but you're going to feel the change of the muscles moving on the ball because you're moving the leg. So you can even lift it up and go from flexion to extension, or just slide the heel. And if you find an area that's making you grit your teeth, just stop and be still and let the weight of that left side of the pelvis just fall into the ball. Visualize it and breathe it. What is it holding? Can you just let it go? And then maybe there's another area you might even want to redo the ball, just move it out to the edge further. I generally start next to the sacrum, work my way out. So just moving the leg, rocking back and forth, sliding it in and out. And if you notice that you're unable to let the weight fall into the ball, then you're probably tightening the muscles to protect that area, and you want to let the muscles relax wherever you're resting. Try resting in a position of internal rotation and external rotation. We'll start to move our way out to the outer hip. So think of this more as an exploration, right? We did the wake them up and find them. We did the stabilizing, and now we're just releasing any of the connective tissue. So you can start to just slowly roll more towards your left side. Here again, I might be still just to find, is it in the right place? Because now we're getting into this, the TFL, tensor fasciae latae. So this can be a really sensitive area for a lot of people. I T-band. And it's not about beating it up. It's about finding it and saying hello. Think of it like your skin, right? We like pleasant feelings on our skin. Well, this is the skin of your brain underneath that skin. And you can just rock your leg back and forth. if you want to go even further to the outside. So I'm still on my back now, but you can start to go all the way over at some point. You can even turn. Gets a lot deeper as you put the weight of the right pelvis, the right hip on top of the left. But you can get right into that outer hip. If it's better to keep yourself upright, you can be on your left arm. But again, this is a practice of release. So if you find that you can just lay, and that's what I'll often do, just lay on the ball and be still. The more you can let gravity be your friend, sink into it, and then just gently rock your right hip or rock your right leg. Probably finding plenty in there with very little movement would be my guess. Most people do. Sensing that, being present in it, and offering yourself love and light in the holiday spirit. So we're going to finish off this left side with the myofascial by going into the front of the hip. So before I do this, first of all, make sure you didn't just eat. You want to be able to feel where your hip bone is, because we don't want to be on the bone. We want to be to the inside. So you're actually going to be in to the center line of your left hip, and you can find where that is. Make sure your ball is the right size. This is often where I like something a little bit softer and bigger, so I use a drier ball, but you can play with all kinds of different balls. So it's going to go right about there, and you're going to roll all the way onto the front side. Let's see, I'll face you the other way, curling and turning. And once again, the magic of this is first letting the weight release. If you can't let your weight release, if you're up here pushing into the ground, for instance, then you've got the wrong ball. It's too big, it's too hard, it's too dense, or you might have the wrong spot. So get it right in there, right on the inside of that left hip. And just sink first. Visualize yourself from the left toes all the way up through the rim of the hip in the front and the back. Just fall into it. You can see if it's helpful to breathe to your belly. If you're belly breathing, you're going to feel the abdomen press into the ball as you breathe in, that resistance. And just feeling the ball gently, like it's entering the space of the front of the pelvis on the exhale, meeting you on that left hip. So as we get ready to find a little bit more action in this one, it might be just gently rolling your leg from side to side, or what I often do is bend my knee and then drop the heel out to the left side, back to center and to the right side. Again, moving from the leg, let the muscles in and around the front of the pelvis stay relaxed. You can also take the ball more down right into the front of the hip crease. So take it in the more down towards the groin area, but just check to see that it's comfortable for you. The front of the hip flexors can get in on the action. So think of that space right where your leg connects to the pelvis. And if you find that sensitive area, just be still. This is another time where sometimes I'll take the block and I'll put that underneath my right hip, especially if I'm doing more of a still practice. And what that will do again is make the weight sort of fall into the left hip, because my right hip is now higher than my left hip. I'm just being still there, relaxing all the muscles. Notice if you're clenching anywhere, specifically around the left hip and thigh. It's just a small rocking motion. Let the ball find you and help you to familiarize yourself with this space. That's all we're doing. We're not stretching it. We're just finding it and being present. If anything, I like to think more of hydrating then stretching. And take your last few breaths there. Go ahead and remove the ball, the block if that's there too. And you might want to swing your legs side to side or make some circles with your legs just before we land and locate on the front side. Let your toes come down to the ground and feel from the toes all the way through the pelvis, front, back, sides. And is there any difference to you between the left and the right? And when you were doing this ball rolling, maybe one part was more sensitive and one was happy-go-lucky. We accept it all. We were having a conversation this morning about the idea of non-dualism and how it carries over really into all of the spiritual philosophies of this trying not to see things as good or bad. They just are as they are. Maybe there was more tightness in the back or the front. Accepting with kindness. And then we'll be doing it all again in the opposite leg. So get yourself started by coming onto your back. Rolling over. I have to borrow some balls from Bodhi again. So starting with the knees bent, take the ball and we'll explore the back, the gluteal area first. Think of your sacrum, and instead of being on the sacrum, you're right to the outside of it. So I generally start right next to the bone, but see where you want to go. You could go right into the meaty part of your gluteal muscles in the middle of the buttocks too. Fall first, land. You'll sense the way that your right hip is slightly lifted above your left hip. You can keep that, or you can slip the block underneath your left butt cheek to let the weight fall more into the right side. So there's definitely a bit more compression that way. But if you're being still too, it might feel good. Checking with your breathing, because if your breathing is restricted, then you know there's too much going on there. This is a present for yourself, not torture. And then you can explore again and keep the hip completely relaxed, that right hip, and just explore moving the leg. Extend the leg out, slide it back in. Simple movements to start. But you can also do that pinky toe side, coming back up, big toe side. Just watch it as you're moving from your leg. Think using the leg muscles. And the benefactor is the muscles in the back of the right hip. They're just hanging out, releasing onto the ball as the leg moves them. If you find a really goopy spot, just be still. Let all your weight fall into it. Sometimes that can be done with the leg extended too. And this is a big area to explore, right? So you can keep the ball in the same spot or even move it just a half an inch or an inch. I joke about there's a half an inch between heaven and hell in any of these. So find that heavenly spot. A quiet space just to come into your own pelvis. There's also the option of lifting your leg. We didn't do that on the first side. You could go and do it when we're done. But as we lift the leg, you'll find more compression too, because then it's the weight of the leg just falling in gravity into the hip. So you're weighting down the hip with the thigh bone itself. And then working your way. Of course, you can stay here as long as you want to come back to it, but I'm going to start to work my way to the outer hip a little bit more tilting towards the right side. And notice when you start to grip, when you're forcefully protecting yourself, then you know you just need to be still and drop for a few breaths. Let go. The muscles will try to protect that connective tissue. And just remind yourself you're on the floor, completely supported. And maybe just little movements, moving the leg. On this side on me, it's a or not. Just being still. Facial expression will say it all. Sometimes you don't even know you have these areas of sensitivity till they show themselves to you in these strange things we do with little rubber balls. And then working towards the outside of the hip. And outside can mean a lot of different things to each person. See where you want to go. You can come up more onto your elbow. Usually there's a little bit less restrictive weight stuff going on there. And you can push into your arm and move. Maybe considering finding a place to just relax into it too, coming down onto your side. Oftentimes I find it's easier to be moving on the ball than to just really let go into it, to release into it. You can rock that top hip back and forth. Myofascial can be such a powerful way to take us into our body, especially when we want to be in one specific area. It's pointing to this area in the outer right hip right now. And what's it saying to you? And feel free to explore another spot in the outer hip. Take a few more moments before we get to the front. The gentlest, smallest movements just to create sensations that are there, but they're pleasant. The term relaxed awareness is the space you want to stay in. And then we'll explore the front of the hip. So take your time, feel where the bone is. You can feel right in the front of the hip bone there and the ilium, and you can go to the inside of that, and then eventually you might work your way down into the hip crease. I'm going to switch to my bigger ball, softer too. So the harder the ball, the more it's going to really get into that space, right? And then size, the bigger. So this is softer, but bigger, so it's kind of a trade-off. And it's just good to try a couple different ones. But first, just landing. Can you let your right hip just fall into the ball? Or are you in any way bracing or protecting yourself? So it might be that you need to gently shake the leg out, or that option is there. Put a little more pressure in it by taking a block and putting it underneath your left hip. So then your weight will roll into that right hip more. Creating a space of presence for your awareness in the front of the right hip. You can breathe through your abdomen. And sometimes the two sides need something different. And I say that because I'm recognizing for me, the left hip doesn't need to be lifted as much as on the other side. I liked having the hip lifted. That's very true. Many of us, raise your hand, have a torsion where one hip is slightly forward of the other or higher than the other. So we have to respond to our body lovingly and make those little adjustments. Don't have to match what we do on one side with the other. Keep relaxing the muscles. And sometimes that muscular tension will show up in places like the jaw or the shoulders, the arms. So it's all relaxed. And if you want to explore more into the front of the hip flexor, you can do that, or even slightly towards the groin area, your inner thigh. So next week is hamstrings. Right now we're feeling that attachment point between the leg, in this case the front of the leg, and the pelvis. It's like the doorway between your legs that will propel you wherever you need to go, and the pelvis that holds that sacred space in your body, connecting your upper and lower body. If you want to bend your knee and rock the leg side to side, or both legs even, just be playful, be thoughtful, be kind. Consider being still when you find any of those spots that feel more bitey. Or you don't have to be right on them. You can be close to them without digging in. And creating space in those connective tissues. When you're ready, remove that block, ball, whatever you have underneath there. Please do. Just rest on your front side for a few breaths, locating yourself in your right hip all the way around. Maybe feeling yourself from the hip to the toes, above and below. See if you can direct your breath again to your abdomen. The floor is there to help you to feel that abdominal breath as you breathe in. You'll sense the compression, the resistance of the floor into the abdomen. And just feel that as a spreading between the hips, from the pubic bone to the navel center. Breathing out, just feeling the way that your body compresses on itself. The abdomen comes back in towards the front of the spine. A soft recoil on the exhalation, nothing forced. We'll take just a moment to finish our practice on the back side. Unless you're comfortable on your front, please feel free to stay there. And if you like knees bent, you can bend your knees and let your feet go slightly wider and let the knees touch. That's a really nice position for the sacrum. It creates a little bit of space for it. Otherwise, feel free to extend your legs. But what I'd say about extending your legs is that if there's any pull in your low back, then you want something underneath the knees. So I'm going to go with the bent legs. Place your hands on the front of the pelvis, maybe fingers touching above and below, thumbs above the navel center, index fingers below. So you're just sort of forming this shape with your fingers in and around the pelvis, the abdomen, the softness and the movement that your hands feel as you breathe to your abdomen. Letting your back release as you breathe out, back side of the pelvis. And the pelvis is such a magical place. It does hold space for two of our energy centers, two of our chakras. The Muladhara at the base of the spine, or you can think of your pelvic floor. Mula meaning root, so it grounds us. You can visualize your legs, and the way we allow ourselves to feel grounded and receive the energy of the earth. that sense of safety, knowing that all our basic needs are met. And just above that, the sacred sacrum in the back and the front and the softness of your abdomen, your womb area, is your Svadhisthana chakra. Sensing that space connected to water, meaning one's own place. Once we know that our basic needs are being met, we have this desire for pleasure, passion. Think of the elements of earth and water, and the sound. Let the sound flow into your body, into the pelvis. Take as much time as you need to come up. Have a very lovely holiday season. Thank you for practicing with me, and I hope I see you next week for a happy hamstring holiday practice. Peace, joy, love, and light.